Imagine paying 1.5 trillion yen to host this massive, lavish dinner party, right? And then your guest of honor just goes and buys their actual meal from your biggest rival and, like, eats it right there at your table.
Yeah, that's a pretty rough night.
It really is.
Yeah.
But welcome to this deep dive. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating document by Kaori Kido that analyzes India and Japan's diplomatic relations.
Right. And it's a dynamic that most people don't fully grasp.
Exactly. Specifically, we're looking at how Japan managed to finance like 80% of a multi-billion-dollar railway project in India, offer this almost unimaginably generous loan, and then somehow still completely lose out on the core technology contracts.
Which is just wild to think about from an international business perspective.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the goal today isn't just to talk about trains. We're using this railway project to explore a masterclass in modern ruthless diplomatic strategy.
Yeah, and what happens when massive cultural blind spots just completely collide with modern geopolitics?
Because to understand global power today, you really have to look past the friendly handshakes and the photo ops.
You do. If you really want to know how countries view each other, you don't look at their press releases, you know? You look at the actual contracts, you look at the structural mechanics, and who actually holds the leverage when all those diplomatic smiles fade.
So let's start with the facts on the ground, just to show you exactly what went wrong for Japan in this flagship project.
Yeah, let's get into the timeline.
We're talking about the Mumbai to Ahmedabad High-Speed Rail corridor. Most people just call this the India Shinkansen project.
Right, that was the big headline name for it.
Exactly. So if we rewind to the end of 2015, Prime Minister Modi of India and Prime Minister Abe of Japan hold this major summit. And coming out of that meeting, it's announced that India is going to adopt the Japanese Shinkansen system.
Which was a massive, massive upset at the time.
Oh, totally. Because up until that point, India had been heavily leaning toward a French high-speed rail system, right?
Yeah, the French TGV system was widely considered the front runner. So on the surface, this looked like a monumental victory for Japanese infrastructure exports.
But, you know, when you actually examine why India suddenly pivoted to Japan, you have to look at the financial terms Japan put on the table.
And what's fascinating here is just how extreme those terms were. To win that bid, Japan essentially gave away the store.
Those terms are genuinely staggering. I mean, the total project cost was estimated at roughly 1 trillion rupees, which converted to about 1.5 trillion yen back then.
There's a massive amount of capital for a single infrastructure project.
It is. And Japan steps in and offers a yen-based loan to cover roughly 80% of that entire cost. But the conditions are what really make your jaw drop.
Right, it wasn't just a big loan, it was the structure of it.
Yeah, they offered a 50-year repayment period, complete with a 15-year grace period before India even has to start paying a single yen back.
Which is already incredibly generous.
And the interest rate, an annual rate of 0.1%.
Yeah, and that's where the macroeconomic reality just completely detaches from the diplomatic narrative.
Wait, how so?
Well, you have to consider the economic environment here, right? India is a rapidly developing economy. Their inflation rate consistently hovers over 5%.
Oh, wow. So 5% inflation versus a 0.1% interest rate on the loan.
Exactly. It's a catastrophic miscalculation for the lender. If their economy is inflating at 5%, a 0.1% interest rate means Japan is effectively subsidizing India's infrastructure at a massive annual loss.
I mean, they are actively losing money on the time value of that capital. Were they just that desperate for a geopolitical win?
Desperate is probably an accurate word for how it was perceived internationally. When European observers and even Indian financial officials looked at that term sheet, it made absolutely no financial sense.
It just looks like free money.
Right. And it fundamentally altered the dynamic. Japan stopped looking like a strategic equal partner and started looking like, well, a desperate sponsor throwing incredibly cheap money around just to get a footprint in the market.
And here is the twist that makes this an absolute diplomatic disaster. The project has faced years of massive delays, mostly because of complex land acquisition issues in India, right?
Yeah, buying the land for these tracks across rural India is a logistical nightmare.
So it was initially supposed to open in 2023. Now they're hoping to just get a tiny fraction of the line operational by August of next year.
And a lot happened during that delay.
A lot happened. India made a foundational decision regarding the railway's signaling system, despite Japan essentially paying for the entire project, and despite Japan already providing free, extensive training to Indian train drivers.
Which is a huge investment of time and resources on Japan's end, by the way.
Huge.
Yeah.
But despite all that, India put the signaling system out to a global bid. They rejected the Japanese technology and adopted the European standard, known as ETCS, and they awarded the contract to a Siemens consortium.
Which completely upends the entire technological foundation of the deal.
I mean, it's just mind-blowing.
To understand why this is so devastating, we really have to look at what a signaling system actually does on a high-speed railway.
Right, it's not just a stoplight on the side of the track.
Not at all. When a train is traveling at 320 kilometers per hour, a human driver cannot rely on visual cues. By the time they see a physical red light, it literally takes miles to stop.
So the computer has to handle it.
Exactly. The signaling system is effectively the digital nervous system of the entire railway. It's constantly computing braking distances, tracking the precise location of every train on the network, and automatically controlling speed to prevent collisions.
It's the invisible software running the physical hardware. It's like Japan bought their friend this ultra-expensive state-of-the-art gaming console. But the friend went out and bought a competitor's proprietary controllers.
Right, meaning the original games you bought them won't even load.
Exactly. The hardware is completely useless without the right software talking to it because they are fundamentally different architectures.
That is precisely the mechanism of the failure here. The Japanese Shinkansen trains, like the highly advanced E5 or the upcoming E10 models, they use a proprietary automatic train control system.
So they can't just plug into the European system?
No, they are technologically incompatible with the ETCS system that India just purchased. The Japanese trains literally cannot communicate with the tracks India is building.
So all of those Japanese trains that were supposed to be the crown jewel of this deal are effectively bricked?
They are. Because India went with the European signaling system, the trains themselves will now likely have to be manufactured domestically in India just to be made compatible.
And all that free training Japan provided to the Indian drivers.
Completely useless.
Yeah.
Because they were trained on a Japanese interface that will never actually be built in India.
Wow. Which naturally leads to the biggest question for anyone listening. If Japan was footing 80% of the bill, why wasn't the core technology a strict ironclad condition of the money?
It seems like an obvious requirement, right?
I mean, yeah. How do you write a check that big and not lock down the tech?
Well, to understand that, you really have to look at a structural vulnerability in Japan's diplomatic and corporate approach. It originates from a deeply ingrained cultural concept known as seizensetsu.
Okay, let's unpack seizensetsu, because this seems to be the fatal flaw in the operating system here.
Yeah, so seizensetsu essentially translates to a belief in fundamental human goodness.
Okay, so like acting in good faith.
Exactly. It's the practice of operating in absolute good faith. And in the context of Japanese business, diplomacy, and legal frameworks, this heavily dictates how negotiations are handled and how contracts are physically drafted.
How does that look in practice? Are the contracts different?
Very different. Historically, Japanese contracts are notoriously brief. They do not anticipate betrayal. There's this overarching assumption that the other party will simply, read the room.
Oh, I see. So the Japanese negotiators just assumed that if India was accepting this incredibly generous loan and taking the Japanese train cars, they would just naturally accept the signaling system too.
Right. They viewed it as an inseparable package deal. From an engineering standpoint, Japan views the train and the signal as a single, unified safety mechanism.
So they didn't explicitly mandate the signaling system in the fine print. They just assumed India would get the hint and honor the spirit of the deal.
Exactly. They negotiated fiercely on the introduction of the train cars themselves, but they barely negotiated the signaling system. They just assumed it was a given.
That's a massive oversight.
It's a classic case of expecting a foreign partner to adhere to Japanese common sense. They projected their own cultural business norms onto a partner that, frankly, operates under entirely different rules.
But, I have to push back on this from an engineering perspective. Let's look at it from India's side for a second. The Japanese Shinkansen system is objectively one of the most reliable, punctual, and safe transit systems in human history.
Oh, absolutely. It has a zero fatality record over decades.
Right. So why wouldn't India just want it? Why go out of their way to reject it, especially when the financing was basically already secured?
Because best is a subjective term, right? It completely depends on a nation's specific logistical needs.
Okay, fair point.
Japan has immense justifiable confidence in its technology, but they often fail to realize that their proposals do not fit the physical or economic reality of the partner country. The Shinkansen is a closed, proprietary system.
Meaning it doesn't play well with others.
Precisely. It requires entirely dedicated tracks, its own dedicated power grid, and its own unique signaling. You cannot run a regular Indian freight train or a local commuter train on a Shinkansen track.
So you're building a totally isolated network.
Yes, and because it's a closed ecosystem, it is astronomically expensive to build and maintain. To make that closed system financially viable, you require massive high-frequency ridership. We are talking about trains departing every 5 to 10 minutes, fully loaded.
Like the Tokyo to Osaka corridor, I mean, it practically functions as a high-speed subway with that level of density.
Exactly. But very few corridors on the planet have that specific demographic density and economic demand. Even within Japan, lines that run into less populated areas, like the Hokkaido Shinkansen, they operate at a massive deficit.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and we see the exact same economic failure with rural high-speed rail projects in China, which are just drowning in red ink. Now, contrast Japan's closed system with the European ETCS system that India actually chose.
Right. The ETCS is an open standard, isn't it?
It is. The European system was intentionally designed as an interoperable technology. It's built on the premise that a high-speed train traveling across Europe might need to cross borders, change networks, and occasionally integrate with existing conventional rail lines.
Which is way more
Oh,
flexible.
vastly more flexible. So from India's perspective, adopting an open global standard that doesn't permanently lock their infrastructure into a single country's proprietary, super expensive ecosystem, it makes perfect logical sense.
The technology simply didn't fit India's reality. But surely someone on the Japanese side should have realized this vulnerability during the years of negotiations. I mean, they must have had engineers in the room.
Well, that points to another structural flaw in their approach. Japan's diplomatic corps often lacks technology-savvy, pragmatic negotiators at the highest levels of these infrastructure deals.
Really? Just traditional diplomats.
Mostly, yes. When dealing with developing nations, the historical Japanese diplomatic reflex has been to rely on official development assistance, essentially just offering money. They didn't have the hard-nosed technical experts in the room pushing back.
Like someone to slam their fist on the table and say, if you do not adopt our proprietary signaling system, this 0.1% interest rate is off the table.
Exactly. And the source actually points out a broader pattern here. If you look back at the COVID-19 vaccine negotiations, you see the exact same blind spot playing out on a global scale.
Oh, right. Japan's Ministry of Health struggled significantly when they were forced to sit across the table from Western pharmaceutical giants.
It's a perfect parallel. Western corporate contracts are the absolute antithesis of seizensetsu.
They are definitely not based on good faith.
Not at all. They do not rely on mutual understanding. They are dense, adversarial documents designed to anticipate every possible disaster, liability, and betrayal.
And Japan just wasn't equipped for that kind of legal warfare.
Right. Japanese organizations were accustomed to their own brief templates, where mutual trust just fills in all the unwritten gaps. So they were completely outmaneuvered. They lacked personnel with aggressive international business negotiation experience, and they really suffered for it.
So if Japan's operating system is this slightly naive good faith, what exactly is the operating system for India's foreign policy? Because I gotta say, they just managed to get a 1.5 trillion yen infrastructure project funded at an interest rate that loses Japan money while successfully keeping total sovereign control over their technology architecture.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
It is strategic brilliance.
It really is a brilliant, entirely cold execution of tactical diplomacy. And to understand how India pulls this off, we have to look at the single, uncompromising rule driving their foreign policy right now.
Which is?
Thorough, absolute national interest.
Yeah.
That is the entire playbook. They do not follow the United States. They do not follow Russia. They do not follow China. And as Japan just learned the hard way, they certainly do not follow Japan just because they took their money.
Right. And the architect of this specific strategy is India's foreign minister, Jaishankar. And his background makes this whole situation incredibly ironic.
It really does.
I mean, he's a former ambassador to Japan. He actually lived there. He has a Japanese wife. He possesses a deep, profound understanding of Japanese society, their corporate culture, and their history.
His diplomatic writings and his analysis of Japan and China are incredibly dense and sophisticated. He completely understands the Japanese mindset.
So he knew exactly what he was doing.
Oh, absolutely. He knows exactly how much Japan relies on reading the air and mutual trust.
But, and this is the crucial distinction for you listening, just because he understands Japan flawlessly does not mean he is playing for their team. The source makes this very clear. He is not part of some pro-Japan faction within the Indian government. He is entirely unapologetically pro-India.
Exactly. He essentially weaponized his understanding of Japan's reliance on good faith to get exactly what India needed, without explicitly rejecting Japan until the ink was dry on the financing.
Wow.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this represents a massive paradigm shift that Japan was just too slow to recognize.
How so?
Well, for over 20 years, Japan has been funding major infrastructure in India. They funded the Delhi Metro, massive projects in Bangalore, developments in Hyderabad.
They've been a huge financial backer for decades.
Right. And because of this history, Japan still unconsciously views itself as a benevolent benefactor, a developed nation providing vital aid and guidance to a developing one.
But India doesn't see themselves as a developing nation in need of paternalistic guidance anymore.
Not at all. India views itself as an absolute equal partner on the global stage.
Yeah.
Honestly, they view themselves as a rising superpower. Their philosophy is purely transactional.
Basically, we will gladly accept your incredibly cheap capital if you offer it.
Yes. But we retain absolute sovereign decision-making power. We will take the components of your deal that are useful to us, and we will ruthlessly discard the components that are not. There's zero sentimentality.
It's exactly like a highly sought-after freelance consultant. Like, they might have a massive portfolio of prestigious clients. They might be incredibly polite and deferential in the boardroom. But at the end of the day, they only work for themselves. They take the gigs that maximize their own profit and build their own resume.
That analogy perfectly captures India's current geopolitical stance. To an outside observer, India's actions frequently look contradictory, right?
Oh, for sure.
Like right now, India's happily purchasing massive quantities of heavily discounted oil from Russia, effectively funding the Russian economy, while simultaneously participating in high-level military exercises with the United States and its allies.
Which, to a traditional Cold War mindset, looks like a massive hypocritical contradiction.
But to India, it is simply business. It serves their absolute national interest perfectly in both directions. They secure cheap energy to fuel their domestic growth, and they secure advanced military cooperation to protect their borders.
It's just brilliant pragmatism.
It really is. The days of any nation expecting favorable treatment from India simply out of historical friendship or a legacy of financial aid, those days are completely over. India is a realist state operating with ruthless pragmatism.
So if India is playing this selfishly, Japan's natural instinct should be to pack up their toys and leave, right? If you are humiliated on your own signature infrastructure project and you lose the technology footprint, human nature dictates that you walk away from the table. So why stay? The only reason Japan would stay and endure this kind of hardball is if leaving costs them something much larger.
Precisely. And that brings us to the geopolitical reality of the entire region. Japan simply cannot afford the luxury of walking away.
Right. The stakes are exponentially higher than a railway signaling contract.
The ultimate shared interest that physically forces Japan and India to remain at the table together is the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
The rapid military and economic expansion of China.
Which is why we see the formation of alliances like the QID, right?
Yeah.
The strategic security dialogue between the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia.
Yes. The entire Indo-Pacific security architecture relies heavily on a strong, independent India, acting as a counterbalance to Beijing.
So Japan is stuck.
They are. If Japan were to walk away from India at a bruised pride over a train contract, and India were to somehow drift closer to China's sphere of influence, Japan's national security environment would deteriorate overnight.
It would be a strategic nightmare for them.
Exactly. Maintaining a robust, engaged relationship with India is a non-negotiable security imperative for Tokyo. They basically have to swallow the loss on the Shinkansen tech to keep the broader geopolitical alliance intact.
But, it isn't just about military security and containing China either. The source mentions these massive, deeply entrenched economic synergies that keep these two nations locked together.
Absolutely. India recently surpassed China to become the most populous nation on Earth. Its economy is growing at a staggering rate. It is quite literally one of the most vital consumer markets on the planet for Japanese corporations.
You look at a company like Suzuki, right? You cannot analyze the Indian automotive market without talking about Suzuki. They have dominated that sector for decades. The economic roots run incredibly deep.
But perhaps the most fascinating complementary relationship between the two nations, which the source highlights, lies in the medical and pharmaceutical sectors.
Oh, this part was super interesting.
It's a perfect example of two massive economies naturally filling each other's structural gaps. India is a global powerhouse when it comes to the mass production of generic drugs. They have the massive chemical engineering infrastructure to basically act as the pharmacy of the world.
Meanwhile, Japan's pharmaceutical and medical industries are heavily skewed toward high-tech research and development.
Right? They're giants in creating advanced medical devices. We're
Yeah.
talking about precision diagnostics, highly complex endoscopes, MRI technology.
So they aren't even directly competing. They are two halves of a complete healthcare supply chain.
Exactly. And that synergy extends far beyond just the manufacturing of physical products. It actually cuts to the core of their respective demographics.
Right, Japan's rapidly aging population versus India's massive youth demographic.
Yes. Japan is facing an unprecedented demographic crisis right now. Their society is aging rapidly, and they have a desperate, mathematically undeniable need for healthcare workers and caregiving labor.
And India has the exact opposite situation.
India is a youthful nation with an enormous surplus of labor looking for upward mobility. The potential for cooperation in nursing, caregiving, and medical training is just massive.
So when you zoom out and look at the macro picture shared security against a rising China, deeply integrated consumer markets, and these perfectly complementary medical and demographic needs, a multi-billion-dollar dispute over high-speed rail signaling is ultimately just a tactical bump in a very long, strategically necessary road.
That's exactly right.
So what does this all mean for us? We started with this massive financial mystery of the Shinkansen deal, and we've uncovered this fundamental shift in how global power dynamics operate today.
I think the most crucial takeaway from Kaori Kido's analysis is this distinction made about perception versus reality.
How do you...
Well, Japan often looks at India, sees a country that enjoys Japanese culture, that doesn't hold the historical animosities that, say, other neighboring countries might, and they assume, oh, they are a pro-Japan country, therefore they will naturally favor us in negotiations.
But the reality is far more nuanced. India is emotionally a pro-Japan country, but diplomatically it is a ruthless, realist state.
Exactly. Emotionally, the cultural ties are warm. But when it comes to statecraft and infrastructure, it is pure, cold calculation. India has evolved. They are no longer a developing nation looking for a benefactor. They are acting as an equal, major power, optimizing purely for their own survival and growth.
And for you listening, this dynamic is a massive lesson in the dangers of projection in any negotiation, whether it's international diplomacy or just a business deal. It is about the necessity of adapting to a partner's reality, rather than trying to force your own cultural assumptions onto them.
Because Japan assumed their proprietary technology was objectively the best, and they assumed that unspoken good faith would just protect their investment.
And because they failed to secure the actual mechanics of the deal, they essentially got taken to the cleaners on the tech side.
Yeah. In an increasingly interconnected and complex world, relying on unspoken mutual understanding can actually be your greatest vulnerability.
Which brings us to a really fascinating thought to leave you with today. We've seen how effectively India's strategy of absolute national interest just completely dismantled Japan's reliance on good faith. But as India's economic and military power continues to surge, they are increasingly going to be sitting across the table from nations that do not play by the rules of seisensetsu.
Nations that are used to playing hardball.
Exactly. It makes you wonder what happens when India inevitably has to negotiate the next massive multi-billion-dollar defense or infrastructure deal with a partner just as ruthless, just as transactional, and just as heavily armed with dense ironclad contracts, like, say, the United States.
Right. Will the Jaishankar doctrine of playing every side hold up against Washington's tactics?
Or will India find out that ruthless pragmatism has its own limits when the other side is doing the exact same thing? That is a geopolitical collision we are all going to be watching very, very closely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.